Okay. Ailee,
Hi.
I cannot express how much I appreciate you giving your time.
Of course. I'm excited to be here today.
So, what's your passion? What are you passionate about?
I'm very passionate about raising awareness about blindness and visual impairments because I myself am blind and I only became blind 4 years ago and it was sudden. I always make the joke that I did not see blindness coming. I didn't know I would become blind. And I realized how many misconceptions and stereotypes I already thought about blindness and the amount of things I did not know about it. And then on top of that, I was in the process of getting my nursing degree. And I was told that for any type of nursing, I would now be seen as a liability, even for teaching nursing or forensic nursing. So even if I managed to get the degree, I probably would not find work. And everything else I wanted to do, like 911 operator or vet tech, also got shut down. So now I was kind of left stranded of what I wanted to do and what I wouldn't be seen as a liability in. I was told my overall career goal should be hotel laundry just because I am blind now. And I was like, okay, this needs to change because I can 100% do more than what you're telling me I can do. It's just what others are scared of me doing because it either hasn't been done because, the ADA only got signed into law, which is the American with Disabilities Act, in 1990. So I still, as much as that was almost 35 years ago on July 26th. It will be 35 years, but we still have a long way to go while disabled people no longer have to be institutionalized, hidden, or killed, depending on your family's financial state. It is still definitely not equal. I mean, as you can even hear from them saying I'd be a liability and not find most work. That to me alone is ableist because it's like they're not trying to be like, okay, you want to work in healthcare. What in healthcare can you still do if not this? That's not what the conversation was about at all.
Yeah, we've certainly come a long way, right?
Yes.
From, like, to your point, there was a time in our society where it wasn't just kind of socially we erased you, but we literally did, to people with disabilities. But do you think it's kind of pervasive, this, you mentioned they said, well, that's all you can do, right? And I think that so many of us have that perspective on disability, that it's, it's a before and after, and before you're productive and after you're not. And I think that is the thing that we need to get rid of.
Correct. And like with disability, a lot of people become blind much later in life, right? We progressively lose our vision and some will get glaucoma or some type of degeneration of their vision.
You can kind of like age into disability.
Correct.
Yeah.
But like 80% of disabilities happen between the ages of 18 and 65. So nowadays that is still kind of like mid.
Yeah.
But they don't fully think, like, you just have to do things differently, but I am still capable of most. Yes, obviously there's very obvious things I cannot do, like drive or stuff like that.
Sure.
Like, yeah, that's obvious. But I'm still responsible to do my chores. I am still responsible to cook my food. Like, I just had to find different ways, and there's different technologies or techniques nowadays of how you can do things. But when you become disabled, there is a grieving process, right? Of the person you once were and the person you saw yourself being. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of disabled folks, like I have a lot of friends that are disabled, they never get out of that process. And I think that primarily, and I know I can at least speak for myself, that primarily comes from how the world views us, is how we view ourselves. I always say that disabled people are the most ableist against themselves because the world has repeatedly told us what we can and cannot do, so we stop ourselves from doing that because we already feel like everything is against us in that motion, that we just stop altogether because it's a daily fight. Yeah. You might make something pass in one area, but then you hit another wall right when you turn around. So that's why I've been very passionate about advocacy and why I want to do this full time, because there's so many industries, even and like corporations or organizations that I work with that want to do the right thing of being inclusive, but they don't know they can or how, especially with the rate that technology is advancing nowadays.
One of the things that struck me so much about kind of the first conversation we had was that realization that it's anybody and could happen to anybody at any time, that we tend to think of disability, and I'm, purely from that ableist perspective, I'm wonderfully fully able with my senses, and while I spent a long time in the Marine Corps, I have a lot of people that I care for very deeply with, that have kind of a different way of interacting with the world. So it's interesting that you said it's kind of that self-perception, because how did it feel? Because it has to be such a change in your perspective on the world, the way you kind of interact with the world, especially because, you were an adult, right? You're maybe not a fully formed person at 20, right? But
yeah,
like
I
an
was
adult.
20 years old. Yeah.
So how does it feel to have to so dramatically alter the way you interact with the world?
Pretty dramatic. Well, first off, from 12 to 18 years old, I was paralyzed. I got Guillain-Barré syndrome. I was wheelchair bound. Well, for a while, I had to learn how to do everything all over again, how to lift my head up, how to sit up. And each of those sections took a lot of time to even do the hold a pencil again, to be able to straighten my fingers. So I had different levels of disability. So at 18, I took my first steps and I was able to walk again and eat again, because I couldn't eat for 2 years. I had a central line that I got TPN because everything shut down. I'm very glad I can eat again. I love food. And even before the age of 12, with living in Frederick, good old Fredneck, my parents put us in sign language classes starting at the age of 4 with me. Since we have the Maryland School of the Deaf here in Frederick, people move from all over Maryland so their kids can go to school here if they are deaf.
Yeah.
And having Gallaudet in DC as well, we do have a big deaf community. So I always say, even far before I became disabled, I was sensitive to disability. So I already knew the capabilities of disabled people far before, but with that being said, with fully losing a sense, and obviously now doing sign language is near impossible.
Sure.
While I can sign, I have a lot of friends that are deaf or hard of hearing. It's like we mainly have to do, like, for them, talk to text, and then I can sign to them, but sometimes it's like it's easier the text at times, and it breaks my heart a little bit. But my friends and I both can't help it. But now getting around, it's very difficult, because if I go into new spaces, right, especially with doing advocacy and events, I'm in new spaces all the time.
Sure.
I'm not oriented to the space, so I can't get around fully independently. And that can be very challenging at times, and especially as a blind woman. Demographically, blind women are at the top of the list that get robbed or molested, because people believe we cannot identify our attacker, which is part of why I tracked down Michael O'Connor, our mayor, because with those statistics and knowing those statistics, how can we as a community help prevent those statistics for that community? Because it's not just me. It doesn't just affect myself. So it's like, for instance, we also know the statistic that blind individuals are the highest demographic to fall into train tracks.
Sure.
So with orientation mobility, which I always say, like white-tipped cane training and how to orient to spaces, we're taught how to roll off of train tracks. So as I know that probably sounds a little morbid or wrong, but they see a problem and they're trying to fix it. They can't fully prevent it. We do that by putting foot braille, like the bumps
Yeah.
all across.
Oh yeah, like along the edge of the dip there.
The edges, so our canes would hit it, so we know we're at the end, and we're doing things to prevent it. So how in other ways can we help it? And once again, we're disabled people are just starting to be seen somewhat as even playing field, and I do say somewhat because it's still getting there. We're not fully seen as equals, I feel, at times, but we're getting there. But it's like having these conversations is the only way, as much as they might be uncomfortable conversations or topics, they still need to be talked about so we can help prevent that for others.
Especially with this idea of so many people kind of becoming disabled, right? That it's not just something you're necessarily born with. Well, some are certainly born that way. That some people have this change in their life and this transition, and part of kind of the crux of the conversation, I think, both in our first conversation and here, is where does that responsibility lie, right? That I don't feel that it lies on the disabled person, that it really lies on the rest of us here in society to make that investment ahead of time. I mean, you talked about the floor braille, right? So like the bumps on besides the train tracks. This is not something that maybe I need right now in my life, but I might tomorrow.
Correct.
And I think that, and perhaps, you mentioned that it's been now 30 some years since ADA, that certainly was a giant accomplishment. But I feel like we haven't come far enough.
No. And also, like, as you said, like, the disability minority is the only minority that anyone can enter at any phase in life. So it shouldn't take for us or a loved one to become disabled to start caring about it.
Yeah.
We should. That's why, I do like workshops at schools, because they are our future software engineers. They are our future architects. Like, what in accessible design and technology can we do to help disabled individuals? Of course, I specifically talk about blindness, but all disabilities as a whole. It shouldn't have to take us being disabled to fully care about it. And like you said, it shouldn't fully lie on the disabled person, because I always say, how can we be seen as equals from the everyday person if our government doesn't see us as equals?
Yeah.
Because they need to follow the lead in a way a lot of the time. And here in the United States, if you've never worked before, right, and you are on disability, on SSI, the max you can make each month is $967 a month. Because you don't get SSDI, you get SSI. You have not paid into retirement. You have not worked a lot of years. People hear these astronomical numbers of people making so much on disability.
Yeah.
It's because they've worked for 30 years. It's because that money they're getting from disability is their retirement. That's what they're getting. That's why it's so much. So I always say, so if you start off disabled, you are basically reliant either on the system to feed yourself, to house yourself. Because, anywhere, $967, I think we can all agree that's not enough to live off of, especially if you want to be independent. You are basically forced to have family help and pay into helping you, or the government if you don't have that family support, which is why you see so many disabled people on the street or in homeless shelters.
Yeah.
So people don't always think about that fact.
Do you think that, and maybe this is kind of more of a question of your own personal experience,
Correct.
that people have that perspective on you, that it should be your family, other people should be taking care of you, that it's not the general welfare? Or is that kind of changing? Do you feel when you're going into these spaces, because you're doing this advocacy work, right? So you're like entering into spaces that there may not be another disabled person in, or not often, maybe is a better way of saying that, or they're trying to be hidden, right? That whatever disabilities are occurring, we're trying to put, as a society, we're pushing that aside. So do you feel that people look at you and say you're someone else's responsibility?
It depends on the situation. I definitely feel for instance, for getting around, it's very obvious I cannot drive.
Sure.
Legally, I cannot drive. I've never
makes
been.
sense.
Yeah, I've never been able to drive, but think that for me getting around, your mother should be driving you around, or you should have specifically, because if I have to get somewhere and let's say my mom doesn't have off, I have to pay Uber or something along those lines, and we all know Uber's not cheap.
Yeah.
And are like, your parents should be driving you. It's like, well, they have to work. It's like we still have to have a roof over our head. They can't take off every time I need to do something, or if I were to choose to do work. They shouldn't have to take off every time I have to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
It's like I have to pay into Uber because Transit Plus is not reliable.
And this is kind of the intersection. I talk a lot in the campaign about transportation and access to transportation, and how it's not a disability, the idea of an economic hardship, right, for some people, right?
Correct.
And having access to go from here to there, as you point, the grocery store, right, just to feed yourself, as opposed to paying. I mean, sure, we now have technology solutions like Uber Eats, right? But that is not economically viable for people, right?
No.
So this, to me, is a giant intersection between both economic access as well as disability access.
Well, and plus those, that need transportation help, they usually don't have the money really to be doing Uber Eats or things along those lines. And plus also, despite our disability or old age, whichever it be, we still want to be independent. We still want to leave our house, because I think we all, now that everybody, most individuals have been through COVID, through 2020, I think we all agree that being in the house long term makes us all a little crazy, and we need to get out of the house and still do things for ourselves. It makes us feel more human than being in our houses all day. It might be fun for like a day or two to be lazy, but after that it gets real old real quick, looking at the same walls, or lack of looking at the same walls.
Yeah, sure. And to me, to me, the bigger and broader issue is humanity. That you are born, you're a human. You have feelings, you have thought. They're fully formed, as I said, human being, and the disability doesn't change that at all in any capacity. No. And I really believe, and I put myself in the camp of people that do not understand the lived experience of somebody's disability, but I think it's so easy for us to think less, right? And I mean, that really, and this gets to the uncomfortable part, right? Is we don't want to think about how I could have an accident, or I could have a disease, or some kind of issue could happen, and I no longer have use of my limbs or use of a sense. And maybe it's kind of like death in that we don't want to think about it, and so we kind of push it off to the side. And it's what I appreciate about your advocacy, is because it's standing in front of people going, I'm here. I still exist. I'm fully, I could see and I can't see. Ailee is still Ailee.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that is improving with your advocacy? Do you think that you are going into these spaces and maybe that's a really tough question. I just don't.
No, the spaces I go in, and once I talk, because it really does make people rethink things when I talk, because they don't think about it much. And of course, like with me being, I'm 25 now, I'm still quite young. People think that I had known about this since I was a child, and I had become blind, because you think of either it was that or older. I was like, no, I was hit by this suddenly. I did not know. I thought after I started walking again, like that was at least it until I hit old age. That's what I hoped. That I knew eventually when I was older, I'd probably become disabled again. But that's in a way how it is and how it should be. You should be able to live a full life. And then that happened because it's very difficult to live a full life as a disabled individual in this day of age. Like I said, while it is better because people people with disabilities, over 35 years ago had to fear leaving their house.
Sure.
Right? But now while it's not that bad, it's like access to work is still not easy, which is why there's, disability in the first place. But so the spaces I go in, I do see people's brains reworking and going, I never thought of it that way. I never thought of this. And them wanting to fix the way they do things and make things more accessible. Like one thing I advocate for is alt text to photos.
Okay.
You can put like a description in alt text, so when a blind person clicks it, it reads what the description of the photo is.
Oh.
So I can still, people who are blind or visually impaired can still enjoy photos. And a lot of people just don't know about it. It's not that they don't want to or wouldn't do it. The way technology is advancing, they don't know that they can. And like, for instance, right now I'm working with an organization that's trying to make higher math accessible for the blind. Because right now, like calculus and algebra, like most of our computers that read it back to us either don't read the symbols at all or think it's a Slavic or Russian language and not math at all, but saying something completely different. So I'm working with them. I run it through my technology and tell them where the issues are, so that way their computer programmers can help fix that for the future with our technology. So like I said, things are advancing, but they're still advancing slowly, and it's something that probably should have been done. We're an afterthought.
Yeah.
Where I always say, like for instance, Android, for the longest time, I couldn't access most Android phones because they didn't have screen readers or very good technology. However, Apple, across the board, from the very start, I could open any Apple product from computer to iPhone, and I could use it. With being blind, it had the screen reader, and it actually has amazing accessibility features for the disabled.
But that certainly started at design, right?
Yeah,
that
it started at design.
It wasn't that they created this product and like so much of the stuff we do in the city and the county, the state, just at all levels of kind of our community and our government, that we create a space or a technology or some function, and then we say, well, how do we add a translator to it, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, which I'm happy for, right? I'm happy that the city of Frederick, certainly we have an ASL translator, right?
Yes.
We have, as during the Disability Pride Month, they showed the video and they said, well, let me narrate over it,
That was so sweet, by the way, when they were like, they were signing, and then they stopped and was like, we're going to replay it, and and I was just like, you thought of me? Honestly, that shocked me. And it's really sad that when things are accessible, when people think about it, honestly, it almost dumbfounds me every time, because there's a saying in the disability community that the disabled have to learn how to be in an abled person's world, yet the able-bodied don't have to learn how to be in a disabled person's world.
Yeah.
Because I always tell people, like, imagine being blindfolded and have to go through your house, even do laundry, cook food, cut chicken, the simple things, right? And also, like, imagine never, like, seeing your loved one's face again, or, it's just a whole nother, like, level. Or, like, imagine, like, for instance, even going outside of blindness, but with deafness, is not hearing even, like, the street signs or the crickets, or, the crunching of the leaves, like, the things that we enjoy. I love going in the woods, so personally, I love the crunching of the leaves, but
like a nature bath, they say, like where you just
exactly.
use nature and just.
But it's things that people very much take for granted, and with it being an afterthought, it's like we said earlier, it can be any of us. So we shouldn't try to want to make it better when we're older. We should want to make it better now from the start. Just like if we start any companies or designs, it should be with the disabled person in mind.
So many people, whether it's in their family, some tragedy will occur and they become an advocate, which it is wonderful that people step up.
Yes.
But so many people, to your exact point, it's once it's now in my family, well, now it matters.
Correct.
Which Apple, to your point, said, no, from design phase, right? So
Correct.
the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, how do we make sure that is accessible? And frankly, to be, to be blatant about it, it's also an economic thing, right? So for businesses, especially somewhere in Frederick, where there's so much of a deaf community, an incredible, both the education system and just the volume of people that are in the hard of hearing community, that it's in the economic interest of the company, right, to be accessible, because now because you're going to have an iPhone and not an Android, right, if it's accessible.
Correct.
So as much as I hate it being a financial reason to do it, I'm saying that even there's a financial reason to be accessible. But it has to be, I think, across the board. We have to start at, and I'm going to say it again, at design phase. Yeah. That when we say we're going to accomplish a thing, so whether that is technology, whether that's a business, whether that is a program where you interact with the with the city or the county, the first thought has to be, how do we overcome any barriers to entry? Which, as I said, could be economic, it could be logistical, it may be location, but it also could be one of the senses. It may be hearing, it may be sight. And while I think we have a bunch of wonderful people here in the city and the county that I think really, really care, it certainly still feels to me a little bit like it's an afterthought in so many ways.
But here's the thing with that, like it 100% should start at design, but I think the big disconnect is it should start in schools. Like, we're not taught disabled history. Like, when in a history class are you ever taught about the disability history? Like, even when SSI started and the ADA and stuff along those lines. Like, I don't recall ever learning that in school, to be quite frank with you. I learned that on my own. So it should start in the schools to be talked about, because one thing I always say is disabled people are often segregated from the abled person in schools.
Yeah,
people
so
who
early
are
on.
blind, there's even a different school for them. There's a different school for the deaf. But then once we're out of school, we're all expected to be able to communicate with one another, but then the able-bodied person is afraid of saying the wrong thing because they don't want to insult. However, one thing I always say, if you say the wrong thing but you have good intentions, I'm not going to take it as an insult. Anything can be a slur or rude if said in the right connotation. It doesn't have to be a particular word. So if you just mess up, I'm going to be like, okay, like this is why that's not correct. It doesn't bother me because you just didn't know. It doesn't insult me because you weren't trying to be insulting. So I just think it should start in schools. And unfortunately, while I don't fully believe we should be segregated, I also don't have a great other way of doing things, because we do need more help. We do need a different way to learn, because we can't learn like the able person if they have lost a sense, and it's so spread out that there's not enough educators that are specialized in that. However, I do think there needs to be more help with segregating, or field trips, or like
integration.
Or even like, we're gonna do this event once a month, that all of the schools or something come together, including the blind and the deaf, just need to be more integrated, more in our society, so we can all, because how are we expected to care or to know, even unless a family member is deaf or a family member is blind, what the deaf and blind need in technology or architect to be able to have them in mind, unless the deaf and blind person is the architect. So it needs to start in the schools to be able to go more broad.
That incredible value of diversity education. I think you're just so right that I'm going to use the word exposure, like exposure to things that are different, people that have a different lived experience, that live in a different place, look a little different, sound a little different, have a little different way that they interact with the world, that the earlier that we can give people that experience and understand that it's just another kid just like you.
Correct.
That how valuable that is, because things like bigotry, things like hatred, all these other are such learned behaviors, right? That you don't have inside of an infant any of that, right? And if you can teach children, I think this is your point, that if you can teach children that the world is a lot wider than you think, and lived experience is a lot different than the box that you grew up in.
Correct.
That you're then going to, and I think you made this point earlier just so wonderfully, that's the software engineer of tomorrow. That's the engineer. That's the designer. That's the implementer. That's the business owner. Those are the people that eventually are going to be making decisions. That's the future city council member. And if they're 4, 5, 7, 8, 10 years old and they understand the world should be accessible for everyone, they're going to build that world.
Yeah, and I always find a lot of the time that children that grew up around somebody that's disabled, whether it's a friend, a family member, their parent, a sibling, they are usually so much more emotionally intelligent at such a young age.
Yeah.
They are, but I think that's both good and bad. And I say that because they've also seen a lot of that comes from they've seen how ableist the world is against that loved one, and how much even they have to fight for them to be able to do the most basic of things, or people, stopping us from doing X, Y, or Z because thinking we can't. And I'm just like, no, we can. We just have to do it different. It's kind of like, remember how like in math class, sometimes there would be more than one way to solve the problem, but the teacher would be like, no, I want you to solve it this way. Yeah. And it's like, but I still get the same answer if I do it the other way. And they're like, no, but you have to do it this way. It's like, if we get the same answer, but we just do it differently, what's the issue? My mother's dyslexic, so I grew up learning that there's more than one way to do something, and it's okay if you do it differently. So that's exactly like how I go throughout life, and I have an autistic brother, so I already knew that growing up with seeing that and seeing how he saw the world and having to take the sarcasm emotion out of things and thinking logically at such a young age. You can probably tell in the way I talk, I very much think that way, and that's how I come across a lot of the time is, let's think about this logically and take the emotion out. But those children that grow up with disabled people are some of, truthfully, the best individuals that I have met, and that are really like, oh, you probably can't do this because you're blind, or hey, let's think about how you can still do this and still have you be included. Like I said, it still like shocks me when people fully think it through, but it's like, you thought it through. Like, that's how it should be. Like we should have like, okay, everybody, like today we're gonna in PE class or whatever, blindfold and try to do basic things so you can see how it is with losing a sense, because they do it like, for instance, this is how it is for a drunk driver. Here's these goggles, right?
The beer goggles, and
to be able to tell from different perspectives. It should be that way with disabilities as well, because realistically that can also be anyone. That could be any one of us, and we should be thinking of how it is, because even having that moment, right? Even being like, hey, I remember in seventh grade we did this. So doing laundry or doing this will probably be difficult, but since I'm now in this field, I can think about that and change this. It's like, because they had that even moment of experience. So that's why I'm very passionate of going into schools, middle schools, elementary schools, high schools, and talking with kids of all different ages about blindness, and that you can still be independent, but that we need the community's help. We need everybody's help to be able to do so, because this is a community issue. This is all of us.
Yeah.
Because even if we live to old age, guess what? We will be disabled.
Yeah, you'll age into it.
You'll age into it, whether it's you're slower and you get around with a walker now or a wheelchair sometimes because you are slower distance. Whether or not you consider that disabled is, your prerogative. But we should be thinking about it now, because hopefully we will live to the point we are old.
Yeah.
So we need to be thinking about it as young individuals and in everything we do and everything we go into.
1,000%. All right, so I've got 2 more questions, and you can answer them in whichever order you want. Okay, so here are the 2 questions. One is, I I am so impressed, and I appreciate that you are literally kicking down doors, right?
Yeah,
So
I'm trying
what
to.
you're doing in the pageant world and in the schools, that you're just saying, hey, there hasn't been a blind person in this space. Well, guess what?
Now
Ailee's
there
here,
is.
right?
Yeah.
So I love that. So the two questions are, one, where are you in 10 years, 15, 20 years? What are your goals? And then the second one is, if you had a magic wand, right, that was nearly as bedazzled. We already put it away, but you're cane.
So my bedazzled white
yeah,
cane.
exactly. So imagine you had a magic wand that was as bedazzled as your cane. What would you change? And as I said, how if you can answer those in whichever order you want.
Where I see myself in 10 to 15 years is hopefully being able to be living independently, being able to afford life, and be able to eventually I want to get off of disability, because I mean there's so much I can't do because I'm afraid of losing my disability that I stop myself from doing for that reason. But I want to be in 10 to 15 years, I want to be going throughout the United States and the world advocating for the blind and visually impaired. And truthfully, I don't want to stop until everything's knocked down, which unfortunately I think will be the rest of my life doing so, whether it's in the United States or outside of the United States, and giving talks and talking to whether it be universities or whatnot. But like I said, I want to do advocacy long-term for work. That is what I want to do. And I'm very passionate and I'm well-spoken. Not every disabled person wants to be an advocate.
Yeah.
So I want, and like I said, like I usually say, I am one person with a disability. I am not everyone with a disability.
Sure.
So this is my own lived experience. So I identify as somebody deeply entrenched in the disability rights movement, as I'm sure you can clearly tell.
Yeah.
But I want to be doing that everywhere as long as I can. And with the magic wand thing is just for everyone to have more empathy towards one another. I think empathy goes a very long way. And if we all had a little bit more and each took a second to truly think and entrench, what would it be like if I was this way?
Mm-hmm.
And how would I want to be treated? As we're taught in schools, right? Treat others how you want to be treated. I still think that to this day, wait, how would I want to be treated? And I do that forth to others, is I think people need to have that more even as we reach adulthood, because I think a lot of people unfortunately lose that as we see in our society, and they don't fully think about, what if I was this way, how would I want to be treated? So I think just people having more empathy towards one another is what the magic wand I would change, because I wouldn't change disability as a whole, because to me, it's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's not wrong being disabled. I always say that, I don't need to be fixed, that I'm not broken. I just do things very differently due to losing a sense. Is it hard some days? Yeah. Does it suck some days? Absolutely. Am I frustrated because the world's not advancing as quickly or in some spaces that I wanted to? Yeah. But it's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be mad, because at the end of the day, we all have something we have to go through in life, and it doesn't make what anybody else is going through any less significant, just different. Yeah. And more people need to have that mind frame.
Well, I'll tell you that with your advocacy, mm-hmm. with you sharing your story and the communicator that you are, that I promise you that you are leaving people in your wake, that as you go into these places and into these spaces and share your story, that you are leaving people behind you that do have more empathy.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
Yeah,
maybe
I know
we can't
I
fix
do.
the whole world, but you are certainly fixing some of what people's perspectives are behind you.
Oh, correct. And just real quick, I wanted to add, even in pageants, which I started up this year in February, that I stopped myself for years from doing it because I had been interested, because I've been interested as advancing my advocacy, and that is a great way to do so, because you have to have a community service initiative, and you're in so much more spaces that me with my white tip cane out in more events, doing more things, that I mean, even going out to the grocery store, right? Like right now, kids go, Mom, what's that? And I can stop and talk to the kid, because most of the time, the mother will hush the child. I'm like, no, it's okay to ask. 'Cause this is how we learn. This is curiosity. This is good. having those moments. But in pageantry, even a lot of people throughout it didn't think I could, but they're like, we're willing to give it a shot, but we don't know that because I didn't see myself represented at all. I mean, you don't really see people with white-tipped canes in pageants. It's not really
Sure.
done, at least in the system that I do it in. But I was like, well, why can't I, and how can we make it accessible that does not give me leverage over the other contestants, is what I wanted to do. And I've been able to do that. You know, I have a local title and I was able to go to state. So being able to show that we can be in spaces is extremely important. That representation of showing that we can be in the community, in society, and we are not a burden. We do not have to be at home. We do not, when we become disabled, have this grieving process. We are not a burden to society like society likes to tell us, and now we're nothing and can do nothing, which is what causes a deep depression to a lot of older individuals that become disabled. But that even these young folks that are disabled are able to, so you can too, is incredibly important to do so.
And perhaps the world is a better place if in every one of these situations, the first thing we think is, well, how do we make it happen, as opposed to all the reasons we can't.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Ailee, thank you so much.
Of course.